Evan, I don't know if you're the one who has attended those meetings or somebody on your team, but there are consistent monthly engagement there. The Fuse monthly meeting is a bigger collaboration than that. It's a national model called the Frequent User Systems Engagement Model, but that involves also Mission Hospital, the county, and other folks, APD, that are working with folks who are cycling through all of those systems. Again, not all of them are homeless, but the ones that are, that's one of the places that they cross over. And then the Justice Advisory Group is organized by Buncombe County, and that started meeting in 2007, 2008, is that right, County? And so the homeless initiative coordinator at each moment of who that person has been a part of these meetings as well. So that just looks at it from that side. Once folks are in the system, then what do we do? How do we work with pre-trial? How do we work with various different pieces of the legal system once they're in the system for more effective intervention, if that's available. So right now, homelessness in the city in general, we're steady at about 500 individuals. We have been for a few years. There's a number of reasons for that. The primary one being that we don't have enough housing for folks to be in, right? But the good news about that, that we actually, Christiane has asked this across the state, is that we are in the highest cost housing market, and our homelessness numbers are not increasing. That's a really big deal. In other cities across the country and across our state, those numbers are going up. And one of the reasons we believe that that's not true here is a lot because of these collaborations, that we are engaging with individuals and not just at this 30,000 foot view to create the appropriate intervention to keep folks homeless for as least amount of time as possible. Housing wait times are still really long. It's over a year for a 1 bedroom, usually longer than that for folks that need an affordable unit. And as you've seen, it just is increasingly hard for those units to be available. The good news is that over the past 11 years, that the number of unsheltered individuals in our community has dropped significantly. It's below 50 any given night, I think, as opposed to 200 or 300 folks that are unsheltered, which means that our outreach folks are doing their job, and our shelters are open on corporal nights for folks that will let themselves come in, those kinds of things. So our graph, it started out with really unsheltered and homeless at this, and housed homeless folks at this a few years ago, has now done this, which is really good news about what our interventions are. We struggle with wages, we struggle with housing, and those things are what they are right now, but our collaborations that are in place continue to be effective for the folks that are here. And they aren't as quick as we would like them to be because the units and services can't meet the demand. But we hope this is helpful to you when you think about data. And Jim's going to come up and talk to you a little bit about some of the APD perspective on trespassing. But one of the things that's important for us about homelessness data is not to connect homelessness to any particular behavior. That we encounter most of our homeless individuals and households as not folks that engage in any sort of illegal behavior at all. And so when we look at data, we look at the whole picture. And again, those three systems I mentioned don't talk to each other. They don't tag folks in a particular way. So it's important to look at it in context and to see the collaborations and the work that's being done to get the appropriate, for anybody coming into the system, the appropriate intervention. And most of the time that's not citation or arrest. So that's where we are from our perspective. You want to go ahead and do your part, Jim, or do you want to do questions now? Then we're coming in sort of questions.
Hello everybody, my name is Sergeant Evan Coward, the Asheville Police Department. This is my 11th year. I want to say I'm proud to have been part of these collaborative efforts so far. In an effort to protect property rights, we respond frequently to requests for checks at private and public properties throughout the city. They're often related to concerns of destruction of property, vandalism, and trespass. I think there was a question, the last one about the trespass laws of general statutes of the state of North Carolina. These two, first and second degree trespass, the main difference is one requires that they break some sort of barrier like a fence or pass some sort of barrier like a fence. Or they enter against being told not to do so by a posted sign or a person in charge. The majority of subjects encountered by officers on posted property comply with the warning and leave voluntarily. Officers often take these opportunities to assess subjects' needs for specific services at that time. A lot of times when we come across these folks, we use our training in crisis intervention. All these officers go through training for crisis intervention to recognize certain behaviors that, someone's maybe going through a mental health crisis or has substance abuse issues, something they need help in. A lot of times, even though yes, they may be breaking the law, the best solution, of course, is to get them the help they need so that this isn't a chronic issue. We can use mobile crisis. We've used the new C366 on Belmore Avenue, the behavioral health, urgent care. All these resources that I know about are at our disposal, and we use them frequently. APD officers are trained in crisis intervention, just like I said, in identifying immediate needs for mental health and substance abuse services, and are often used in lieu of arrest when possible. Our downtown unit regularly attends the Asheville Homeless Coalition's meetings, and we work closely with the city's homeless coordinator and resource providers during Code Purple, especially to help everyone find a warm place to be. Code Purple is especially important in the wintertime, where we ride around at night and find somebody. It's obviously cold out. They need somewhere to be. We'll try to work with them as best we can to find somewhere to be. The local shelters and everyone work very well with us. We work very closely to find people somewhere to be. Questions on that? Okay.
So the first question is, Heather, you said, the vast majority of our homeless population doesn't intersect with law enforcement.
Correct.
On any regular basis or at all.
Correct.
So what numbers are we talking about? Are we talking?
Less than 10%.
Okay, and so that's 50 people. Okay, who are sort of regularly, and then that's my kind of second question, is
Right.
are these people kind of regularly in and out of the system, or is it a different, there's probably a small number of people who are regularly, but
Absolutely.
then is the rest of that 50 people sort of, you may see them once and then you don't see them again.
It runs the gamut. I mean, it's hard. Again, each of them are unique individuals and have various other things going on. And we know the number because literally these smaller working groups that have, releases of information and rights to privacy, so they can talk to each other about these individuals. We can't just show you the names. That's inappropriate. And these smaller working groups have those names because they are engaged with these folks all the time. And I think it goes from someone who's in and out 5 to 7 times a week to someone that's once every 6 months. It just depends on what. I mean, we do have that level of arrest, someone who really has a lot of significant behaviors. But Cristiano was just telling me the other day about one of our longtime homeless folks who is well known in the community, and we have worked across sectors to try and house stably and all those things. And that person is now housed, and the number of incidences of interaction with law enforcement have dropped by more than 50% since this person has been housed. And that's often what we see, and sometimes over time that decreases to almost nothing. So that's the goal, is because we know that tends to be what happens, is that folks who are out in the street and get to the point where the APD or even the county folks, the sheriff deputies too, when they get to the point where there is no other choice that the officer has, sometimes there's a moment that we can reach them too, that we get them into custody, and then there's a way to create some engagement. But it takes time with some folks. Some folks they'll show up on the frequent top 25 list for a year and then they'll disappear. It just depends on the individual.
So that gets to my final question. It sounds like the question was, all these groups that you mentioned, are they working more at a policy or systems level, or are they really zeroing in on individuals?
So most of the groups are zeroing in on individuals. The homeless coordinator's role is to take that information and put it at the policy level, right? To say, here are the trends, and here's what's working. Here's what has worked with these individuals. And when she sees that there is, hey, this keeps coming up, then she can talk to the provider and say, what is there a particular thing that's happening with this, or comes up at one of these meetings? And Evan does the same thing. Like, hey, we're really struggling with this one particular individual. We know this individual is also homeless. Who else do we need to get into this picture to see if we can have a more appropriate intervention? And again, nothing's works 100% of the time. But I think the really good thing about our community, in the years that have happened since, Evan and Amy and I were in a room years ago, is that we've really seen this work. So we've seen folks who we thought would never be okay and would always be outside and die outside, are inside and okay. And that, it's taken a lot of work, and nothing's perfect, but we need more housing, we need, all those things that we know that we need for those things to happen more rapidly. But the collaborations have worked, for incredibly effective outcomes for the majority of people.
My question is about the numbers that were shown at our last meeting. Now that data was collected using people who reported their addresses as being one of the shelters, for instance. That was
Correct.
Because the person doing the analysis didn't have access to your database of people who are registered. It did show up a lot of arrests.
Sure.
Right. I mean, and a consistent, and I'm trying to square that with if most of the people move along if they're asked to.
So I think when you talk about that data, it's not a lot of arrests per day. I mean, there isn't a way to say in the data that we look at, this is why we end up going to the individual. When Christiana looks at data from any of the other systems, a trespassing charge doesn't tell you what other charges might have been with that charge.
Right.
Or there's no way to do that. There's no way to get kind of down to, like, there may have been a trespassing citation, but that may have been the least of what was happening. And it also doesn't say whether that person just moved on after that citation. So it's very, very hard to look at just that really basic level of entry into the system and equate it with an individual's location. 20 Davidson Drive is also used a lot because that's the address of the jail, and a lot of folks cycle in and out of that. Folks that use the shelters addresses, a lot of folks that we move into other units who are housed continue to use the shelters addresses for a number of reasons. I don't need to speculate about that, but they will continue to use that as their address even when they're housed. So addresses are hard. I mean, it doesn't give a great indication. Again, which is why our goal is, and ABD's goal with homeless individuals too, is to get the most effective intervention for that individual possible. And so we just go to those individuals because we know that high level look at some of this data doesn't give us enough information.
So, I think I know the answer to this question, but you guys feel like you're doing a lot to address some of the concerns that were raised at our last meeting. And you feel like the way that the law enforcement is intersecting with this population is not prejudicial or discriminatory in any way. Is that?
Absolutely.
Yes, and you say that. Okay.
And again, that's changed over time too. I mean, we didn't used to have as many officers crisis intervention training as we do now. I mean, so there's been a lot of changes over time too, as we've tried to move more toward an intervention model with folks on the street as opposed to an enforcement model, even though both can happen. But that has the outreach team at Homeward Bound that works out of the day center. I mean, they're often part of that crisis intervention training. So that's happened over time. To reach some of that more pervasive level of training within the department.
Well, I was wondering, would it be possible, if you've had this collaboration all the way along, to try to develop the same sort of chart, the same sort of analysis of the situation that we were presented before? I mean, okay, so you're indicating that using the addresses is a flawed method of
To connect to homelessness, correct.
Right. But you do have, between the various agencies, you do have the names of the people who are homeless who've been involved with the law.
We do.
Is there any way to get that data? I don't want names.
Sure, Christiana has that data. I mean, it changes, but I mean, she could do an overview for you of kind of trends of what that looks like with that smaller number of folks.
Yeah, I would really like to be able to compare it to what we were doing before, just because I'm curious.
Sure, I mean, it's not going to be, again, it's not apples and apples, so I mean, it's not going to be a comparison because of the way that data was pulled, but what she can do is give you an overview of the folks that are in that group that Evan and his team and the homeless service providers work with to show kind of what that looks like.
Okay, thank you.
But again, it's not going to be apples and apples because it's a very different way of looking at data. what's the capacity for homeless service providers? You know, one of the direct lines, you know, with officers and with Gianna's office is to the homeless service providers, you know, and their outreach teams, and they're limited. They're also dealing with folks who are in their building, and, you know, so if there's anything that we can do better, it's capacity on all sides to be able to adequately give the supportive services necessary to move someone from homelessness to housing. And that's a multi-system issue. You know, the hospital will tell you the same thing about discharge workers, you know, that they do everything they can to not discharge someone into homelessness, and yet they have an incredibly limited capacity about how they can do that, right? So in these fuse meetings, that's a lot of what they talk about is, you know, how do we do better with what we've got, because nobody's increasing capacity, nobody currently has resources to increase the capacity to do that. But that's where we fall short, is the ability to spend the time needed for those interventions to happen more quickly and more appropriately immediately. And it takes longer and shorter amounts of time rather than being able to spend the many, many hours that would be ideal right at that moment. Does that make sense? Kind of, but again, it's across the system. You have the fuse meeting, you may want to say more about that, about how you guys talk about that.
Yeah, it's the beginning of a capital collaborative effort. You have folks from every resource provider, in the area, and the hospital, Buncombe County's there. They pick a couple folks that are really having a hard time, and we talk about what is their main issue when we come across them? What is their crisis when we come across them? Because it's so much different than if they're in the hospital. If they go to the hospital, they can have a whole different way of doing things. So we talked about, you know, what's stopping them right now from staying out of the jail, staying out of the hospital, and you just focus on that, and everybody works together to kind of make a game. And we get on board, and you know we've got subjects who have been housed downtown. We're focusing on keeping them in their housing, because sometimes that's harder than easier said than done. Right? So we know these folks individually. When we see them, we can help them out. We know kind of what their needs are.
I mean, unfortunately, it's triage. You know, we're not at a systems place in any part of that can do more than triage. And so the folks that are having the most amount of issues at that time are the ones that are going to get more attention. Doesn't mean there aren't 25 people behind them that could use a lot more help at that moment and could prevent a longer term episode of homelessness and other issues deteriorating. But unfortunately, we don't have the capacity to do that.
Okay, any more questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
I have just a couple things I have on my mind. One is to thank you, Julie, and the police department for working on the use of force policy. It was really good press in the Mountain Express this week about that. And I really want to credit the whole task force that got together and spent a lot of time doing that. I was really pleased to see that the representative of the company that moderated or oversaw things said that we very likely have perhaps the best use of force policy in the United States right now. And it's going to be implemented over the next few months. There's still a comment period for the public, so you can go to the city website and look it up if you want to make comments. Anyway, I just really want to thank you all for doing that. Two other things that are on my mind. I've had constituents tell me that they have a strong impression that traffic stop, set up traffic stops are occurring more often in some neighborhoods in the city. And the suggestion is that it's discriminatory in some way.
You mean where there's like a roadblock?
A roadblock type
License
traffic
change?
stop, yeah. And I'm curious about, is there a map of where we do traffic stops around the city? I'd be curious about that. I've never seen one on Kimberly.
I understand this question. We do checkpoints, but that's data driven, and there has to be an ops plan that goes with it.
There has to be a what?
An ops plan, they do an ops plan about why they're doing it, where they're doing it, and it's usually determined on the number of accidents, the number of DWIs that come from that area, the number of complaints. So that.
Okay.
But traffic stops themselves just happen where the traffic stops.
Once I met was the license
checkpoints.
checks or checkpoints.
Right.
Yeah.
Could we do a write-up and share that with the committee?
Sure.
Just what triggers that?
Sure.
What the criteria are,
Yep.
how it's applied?
Can we see where these checkpoints are?
In a map, in a
For
map.
the last year or?
the other one that's been on my mind recently, since I read a couple of articles and now I've read some research on it, I asked about this and got the first piece of information. And that is we're using the NIK field test kits for field drug testing. And the research I've been looking at says that there's never been a peer-reviewed study of that product and that it turns up a lot of false positives. Now, I understand that in order to go through a court prosecution, the substance has to be tested in a lab. But the problem that I see in between there is that a lot of people will plead guilty, say to a lesser charge. And if it was a false positive test, that means they're pleading guilty just to cut through the legalities quickly. That doesn't seem right to me. If and I have read stories, and I'm in touch with a professor who's going to give me more information. But things like flour being tested positive as cocaine and causing somebody a whole lot of legal trouble before it gets to a lab, and chocolate being tested positive for hashish when it wasn't there. That we shouldn't be convicting people based on mistaken evidence, I don't think. So I would like to learn more about that. I understand it's the most widely used test kit in the United States, so I mean, it's not like we're an outlier or something like that. Anyway, it's just it troubles me that there are serious questions being raised about that. So I don't know where to go with that, but I'm going to continue to find out more. There's apparently a professor in North Carolina who's leading the research questioning that. I'll know more further.
How, do you know how long it's been used?
It's been this particular test has been used for over 70 years, and it's been questioned the whole time by some people. But it's a quick test. It's like a color change, a liquid that changes color, and you want that to be accurate, like a pregnancy test.
Yes, you do.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that.
We'll schedule a presentation.
That would be great.
Because I think we provided the information we have. It'd be good to have on that.
Yeah, I got the information about the product, and I'll see what more I can find out.
That's
Okay.
for future meetings.
Are there any issues y'all want to get talked about in the near future?
I don't think so. Are folks gonna talk about, I'm interested in some response to the presentation that we heard. I know people could speak in public
Yeah.
comment, but if there's nobody here who's planning on doing that, I would be interested in getting a response to that. So we'll just see what happens.
Okay, so that's where we are, public comment, and maybe I'd like to talk about it.
Trying to stay here, you wanna come up?
Keep wherever you're more comfortable.
Wanna thank y'all, everybody for coming to this meeting and the members of the committee, and, thank you to folks from the city who came to bring more information, and, certainly throughout this, I think our homeless boys group from Be Loved to Asheville has said that we appreciate the vast work that the city is doing, and Christiana and the team, Heather and Evan, who are here, are doing to house folks, who are living on our streets. I think for me, the thing that came across that I'd really like to highlight and continue to work with this committee on, is that certainly what we're seeing and what the data that we pulled told us, and what people who are living on the streets are telling us, those experiences aren't matching up to what we're hearing. Certainly we're working with individuals, and I think that's really good work, and those collaborations are yielding some really good fruit. But we're talking about systemics, and I think that's what's really different, and what I wanna highlight, is that those systemic patterns are really important. And what we're hearing and seeing on the ground are certainly experiences of, and I think Julie, you said it really well, you know, are we being fair and judicial with the folks, and as helpful as we can. I really appreciate folks with the kind of crisis intervention training that y'all have, and I don't always see that being used. I see a lot of resources. I see a lot of officers, oftentimes on one person who's living on the street, that does think we're gonna keep working with this data. Christiana had us pull 20 Davidson Drive, and so we already have that data. Actually, the numbers went up, I believe, that we have, once we did that. And so I do think it's important both to have sort of this close-in view, but also the bird's eye view of sort of what's happening in the overall system. And we'd certainly love, I know Cecil's coming to talk with our group that meets every week, and so we'd certainly really invite y'all to come and hear the experiences of folks on the street. Because this is a real struggle in their day-to-day experience. And so I find it really interesting, one of the things that was presented, which said that once people get into housing, the interaction with police decreases. And so for me, that's troubling, because what it says is folks who are in public all the time have more interactions with the police. Our folks live in public most of their day-to-day lives. And so that for me is troubling at that intersection. And how are we dealing with those interactions in a way that doesn't further hamper people from getting into housing when we know it's incredibly difficult. So we want to really look at the systems view with much thanks and gratitude for the work that's being done at the individual level, because both are important, both are needed. And so we want to keep coming at this, and I think we can work. I know you had this idea, we can pull those individuals even out of the data set, I believe, and see. But I think that this data is important, and I think we need to keep working through what are we seeing at the systems level that we can change. And I appreciate folks saying, like, let's be solution oriented, because that's what we want to do. Because I think there's a great deal of resources on the line, and when we talk about capacity and the great need for more capacity, then we need to look at how our resources are being spent in the overall system. So I thank you, and we certainly want to keep coming and working on the solution together. Appreciate it.
And Amy, are you all talking to each other?
Yes.
No, the conversation is not just happening this way.
Yes. We've already met together.
We now are having a conversation. They did not talk to us prior to the presentation they gave to you.
Okay, anybody else?
Hi. I am,
Tell us your name.
I'm gonna say Raven, sorry, I forget this 11:30. I'm really glad to hear that these subsets of the coalition and HIAC are working so closely on this issue. I am a member of both HIAC and the Homeless Coalition, and I don't remember this issue being discussed in any substantial way since 2012. I'm sure the other people in the group would love to see a copy of this presentation. As far as the numbers of housing versus arrests, whether people interactions drop when they become housed. We talk a lot about the distinction between causation and correlation. I'd like to remind people that the presence of correlation does not prove causation. It also does not prove the lack of causation. It can both be present. And we cannot eliminate the presence of causation if we do not allow or in fact encourage free and open research into the issue. And finally, I know some of you have heard this before. I don't remember what I've told you guys. I have never in my life had any interaction with the police other than calling them myself for some reason, or going to the police academy and coming to meetings. I've certainly never been in any kind of trouble with the police. I never expected to be. When I became homeless, I wasn't on the street for a week before I was warned by other people to watch out for the police, that they would find something to charge me with whether I did anything or not. But during the time that I was homeless and during the couple years afterwards when I was still working with the Homeless Network, I heard multiple stories of people who were not the frequent flyers. Yes, the frequent flyers exist. They definitely do. No one's arguing that. But I heard multiple stories from people who did not fall into that category of being harassed by the police. And it is not enough to simply blame everything on frequent flyers. If people are not actually being cited, but are just being harassed and HMIS can't track those interactions. And their reports are all we really have. Unless the police have some other means of tracking that. And in fact, back in 2012, when this issue did come up at the coalition, we asked for the police to set up a system that could track arrests of homelessness and the outcome of those arrests, how many were actually being convicted of something and how many were wasted the course of time by being thrown out. And at that point, we were told that no, it simply wasn't possible for the police to do that. I would judge it is possible and it should be being done.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I would like to say something.
Yep.
Okay, my name is James Gambrell. Hello, folks. And I was wondering towards the statement that was made about the police, law enforcement agents asking individuals to leave the premises or whatever, you know, and they do. Okay, I would like to know before they leave, are they written a ticket and then they leave and not put in jail? Is this what's being said, or is it being said that they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that," and leave, and no criminal charges are pressed against them at all? I want to know what's going on that one.
I think that's what you said.
Yeah, what I was directly referring to was being warned, unreleased.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments?
This is for Heather, Byron Griner.
Hey, Byron.
As I've kind of learned all about the homelessness, especially when Brian Alexander was at Homeward Bound, one of the things that was amazing to me is that the faith-based groups and the people that provide don't play well with one another. And I was just wondering if that's better and if y'all work to kind of join that, because together, you know, we all win, but separately we don't. So I was just curious if that's gotten better.
Well, I think, you know, one of the things that's great about Asheville is our diversity, right? But that also means a diversity of philosophies about how to approach homelessness, folks who are homeless, why folks are homeless, how they should receive services, all those things. And I would say that we work better collaboratively today than we did 8 years ago. And that doesn't mean there aren't issues. That doesn't mean that there are, you know, I do know stories, I know people that continue to feel like there isn't a place for them because of those varying philosophies about how to approach people and how to identify. I think it's an ongoing challenge for diverse communities where providers have different philosophies. Certainly all public funded institutions, that's not an issue, but institutions that are not, institutions and agencies that do not have public dollars, we do not have any authority at all in how they run their programs. One of our big wins, and Christiana can provide more information about this if we need it, is that one of the things we were able to do over the span of Code Purple's life in the winter is all but one of our shelters can will accept people who are not sober. The one that doesn't can't because of federal funds that are in there that are not our funds, but the others who originally would not accept folks overnight who were inebriated will. You know, that took some time, but they will do that now. You can't keep drinking while you're inside the shelter, and the reality is some folks choose to not go in because they would prefer not to abide by rules that have to happen for everybody to be safe inside. But so we've made some, you know, there's also some good things that have happened over those collaborations that have allowed a more diverse group of people to be inside when folks are at their most vulnerable. It's not easy, and being inside, if you've walked into a shelter, it's just hard regardless, and Code Purple's even harder because it's over capacity. But it's hard. I mean, the answer is it is hard, but that we've made some strides in some areas and not in others, you know.
Well, there's an effort being made.
There's definitely an effort being made, and I think that, you know, when there's a crisis in particular, every one of them rises to the occasion. Would you say that, Christiana, that every provider says, let's see what we can do? Absolutely. I mean, that's definitely true. I mean, unfortunately, you know, there are individuals that we encounter that end up having to have law enforcement intervention because either they aren't safe to themselves or others, or there's been an offense that there's no way law enforcement can ignore. But we certainly try for those to be as far between as possible. I certainly don't wanna be in a community where people are asked whether they're homeless before they get a service, right? I mean, there's not an indicator for service, right? If people are in need, we wanna be able to serve them. You know, we track homelessness through HMIS because we want folks to be able to not be homeless, and that's how we can do that. But otherwise, we just try to work together for the best things possible for folks.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I just wanted to speak a little bit on. Yeah, I'm Patrick Conant. I just wanted to speak a little bit on the information presented today. I think it definitely introduces some questions, shows some different conclusions, say, than the data analysis I presented a few meetings ago. At the same time, without me being able to see the data that was used to generate those conclusions, it makes it very hard for me as a citizen to do a comparison or try to figure out, what we've missed or why we're seeing very different conclusions. I think, it's worth having a debate of whether using addresses to indicate whether people are possibly homeless is a reasonable discussion to have. At the same time, it was presented that it's, say, 10% of our homeless population that has encounters with law enforcement. But I just wonder, how is that number calculated? And when we're looking at numbers of, say, high-frequency users, does that capture everyone that is on the street, that is receiving a citation? But as a citizen, without being able to see that information, it's hard for me to do any further analysis or see why our conclusions are so different. So I would just basically just request that more of this data, the raw data, if it has to be anonymized, that's fine. But there really should be some way to share more of that information so that I think those of us working in the community with data can figure out why we're seeing different things.
I think that's a really good idea. We are committed to being an open data city. So it'd be nice if that information could be shared as anonymized. Is that correct, Rufus?
Yes.
Can I respond to that? Cecil, just for you guys and for Patrick. One is, Christiana will prepare an aggregate report for the folks that we've identified that are homeless and also interacting with law enforcement. But again, I want to caution, there's not an apples and apples comparison here. Law enforcement does not ask if people are homeless when they are arrested, regardless of what address they give. So there's no way to do apples and apples here. We are identifying homeless folks. They're serving the public regardless, right? So, they're not asking people are homeless. So it's not gonna be apples and apples. I think that Christiana's overview will show you how these systems are working together for interventions for homeless folks. That's what that overview is gonna show. But it's not gonna be an apples and apples. There's no way for us to do an apples and apples comparison when the system that Christiana's working with is the only one asking whether somebody's homeless. Does that make sense?
Right, but can't you do a sort that the same named person is in the police record as is in your database of registered homeless people? I mean.
So if we did that, right, then it would be obvious who we pulled out.
Well,
And I'm not sure how to do that without, we can't do that, can we? Without violating privacy.
well, but then it seems like you can still scrub the names. So what I think Patrick and these good folks are interested in is, again, that sort of aggregate data about, this intersection of homelessness and law enforcement, and and Christiana knows directly who those people are.
I know, aggregate data,
Right,
yes.
but, we know who those people are from the database
Right.
that you mentioned. We know arrests that have happened. It seems like would be not difficult to sort of, start with the list that the city has, run that through, see who shows up, but then scrub the names from all of that.
Christiana, you wanna respond to that about privacy?
The issue is, once you take a name and run it through HMIS, at that moment, without that person's consent, you violated their privacy.
So even doing that, yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Running it through,
HMIS,
is that the police database?
that's the homeless.
No, that's the homeless database, and that's the only thing that they have given us permission to look at. So if we cross their name with another database, that's
it's a
violating.
violation.
Right, I mean, so I
Okay.
mean, folks on the street will tell you this, their privacy gets violated all the time, the way that people have to ask their questions, and we already have to ask too many questions, and so we really try to limit how we do that. But again, I think that what the data that, Christiana has will give you a good picture of how these collaborations work. But it is not gonna give you an apples and apples comparison to arrest data, because arrest data doesn't ask the same questions. I know this is challenging, and we're not trying to not look at this intersection. I guess what we're trying to say is we do look at this intersection through the means that we have, and it's not the same as looking at arrest data. Does that make sense? I mean, it's,
Yeah.
But
they're just,
the arrest data is public record, right?
correct,
So,
but HMIS is not.
no, I get that,
And all the providers will tell you that they would scream bloody murder, I think, if we tried to do something like that with the folks that they're serving.
If you took those names, ran them through the police database.
We can't. I mean, we can't take data out of HMIS and run it in any other database without violating privacy.
Right.
That's what I'm saying, we can't, I mean,
So it's like permanently opaque.
what I'm telling you, and I hear that the public is saying, some of the folks in the room are saying something different, is that we do not believe it's opaque because we know who these folks are, and we are literally working with them every day. And if there are folks that, advocates in the community feel like that we're not reaching, please tell us, and we will.
Right, so that
work on
gets to the scale issue, is that you guys are looking at you're looking at a systems level and a much higher and a much bigger data set, and you guys are down on the ground talking about individuals, both of which are helpful. So this is Amy's point exactly, that there are these two different levels. One of them is, they're both relevant.
Sure.
So how do we?
So what we're saying is the city staff, we're looking at 30,000 foot view too, but we're not looking at it in the same way as just doing an open data poll from police records, right? We're doing it by these cross collaborations that Christiana and Evan, at the levels that they are working with these providers and are working with individuals, right? So that Christiana can track and does over time what those trends are and see if what's going up and down and what we need to do differently. I mean, the Fuse project came out of actually that tracking. We need the hospital in this. We need, so some of these collaborations have come out of our tracking of that over time, if that makes sense. But yeah, this is not rockets. It's not science, right? I mean, we're talking about the right intervention for folks who are homeless. And when we talk about engaging system and systems engagement's going down, we're talking about the whole system, right? They interact less with the ED. They're not in public as much because they're more stable in their home, and the behavior that all of us get away with in our homes that you can't do on public property, right, isn't happening. So it's most of what we do in our private residences is what people kind of get in trouble for in public, right? What you can do in your home. If any one of us did that, spend a Friday evening out in public doing half of what we do, we'd be arrested too.
You must live very interesting.
Thank you.
I mean, you guys are all people of intelligence and goodwill, and I feel like you're gonna figure this out.
So here's what we can do, and if this is what you're asking for, Cecil, we're happy to do it. Christiana can for next month give you that aggregate kind of overview, and you can have that information, and we can share that information. It's about public information when it gets to the aggregate form, so we're happy to share that with whoever wants it.
Can I ask something a little more specific? I understand there's certain information that, is privileged, can't be shared, but I'm thinking of things like, say the statement that because of crisis intervention training that less interactions are resulting in arrests. It is somewhere in there has to be public data, right? I mean, are we able to get that information as a comparison to what we're seeing? Because that is different than what I see. Looking at not 20 Davidson Drive, but the 3 shelter addresses, I see the arrests going up, not down.
We have citation records, but if you show up to the scene, someone's complaining about someone being on the property, and during that, you don't arrest them or don't cite them. What happens after that, be it a warning release or taking the services or however, isn't necessarily in the same realm of data. You're not gonna have that.
So is there a record created if you give them a warning or you take them for services instead of an arrest record, and is that public?
Taken for services? No. No, it's not.
So does does the department track it though internally? Can we get aggregated numbers on that?
We don't track, no, if we go respond somewhere or come across someone and take them to services, it's not using a number.
So I just wonder though then, when we're looking at the number of arrests versus the number of warnings or people taken, how did you determine that that's changed?
You're not gonna have these.
But I'm just saying, how can you make that conclusion without any data? That more interactions are resulting in a diversion rather than arrests?
It's experience, and folks on the ground doing the work.
Okay.
I mean, what Christiane can give you is when it gets to the level that it is entered into the system, that's what we track. And we track ED stuff, I mean, this is emergency department stuff too, but, she can pull that out as best as possible from those numbers.
I just think it's gonna be hard to compare, say, experience-based numbers versus hard data numbers, and.
Well, that's what I'm saying, that's what I'm saying, that this working with individuals to help them move beyond homelessness is not science. That's what I mean, so we're bumping up against quantitative and qualitative services. And so there's only so much, you're gonna see one thing from quantitative data, and then there's a whole bunch of qualitative stuff behind that. I mean, I'm not sure, there's not an answer to that, other than I think we've got lots of good folks doing really good work, and we can show that, but it's not gonna match up with just a quantitative look at data.
Maybe we take a look at what you've got next time and see if that drives the conversation in a
Yeah.
particular direction.
That's a good idea. Thank you all for the conversation. I think we're all maybe understanding things better. And, maybe raising awareness, will help too. Okay, anybody else have public comment?